skies above the Pan-Pacific Empire were choked with smog and ash, as if the world itself recoiled from the atrocities below. Darkness had fallen over these lands long ago, not the darkness of night, but a perpetual, acrid haze cast by ceaseless industry and the crackling discharge of forbidden technologies. Rising from the poisoned earth, surrounded by sprawling pits and slag-heaped mountains, loomed the Obsidian Tower, a fortress city of glistening black metal and jagged steel. It was here that Narthan Dune, the tyrant of the Pan-Pacific Empire, ruled as a god among men. Dune stood atop the tower's highest parapet, a silhouette framed against the red-tinged sky. He was an imposing figure, his body a grotesque amalgamation of flesh and machine, the result of centuries of modifications and dark experimentation. Sinuous cables, pulsing with energy, snaked from his spine and coiled around his limbs, each one twitching like the limbs of some terrible, dormant beast. His eyes glowed a sickly green, a side effect of the alchemical elixirs that sustained him, and in their depths lurked a malice honed over generations of conquest. Below him stretched the vast reaches of his empire, a land cowed into submission by terror and technology. Once, long ago, these lands had been lush and vibrant. Now they lay broken and scarred, stripped of life and repurposed into fuel for Dune's war machine. In every city his soldiers patrolled, cybernetic monstrosities known as the Steel Wraiths, each one a fusion of bone, steel, and circuitry. Programmed for loyalty and brutality, they enforced his rule without mercy, prowling the streets like wolves scenting blood. The people lived in constant fear, under the gaze of their tyrant's watchful eye. Those who resisted were taken by the Generites and Scion Weavers, twisted into obedient thralls, or turned into nightmarish servants of the Empire. Children were tested at birth for psychic potential. Those who showed even a spark of ability were taken, trained, and broken to serve Dune's will. For years, the Pan-Pacific Empire had remained unconquerable, a bastion of terror and defiance amid the ashes of old Earth. Few dared to challenge Dune's reign. Rumors had come and gone of conquerors from distant lands, each one claiming the title of warlord or king. But one by one, each of these fools had fallen to Dune's weapons, his monsters, his relentless inhuman soldiers. But now there was a new name carried on the winds, a whisper of a figure who claimed dominion over all humanity. They called him the Emperor, though Dune found the title laughable. A conqueror, perhaps, but nothing more. There were no gods on Terra. If there had been, he would have killed them himself. And yet, the stories continued. A being who shone like gold, whose voice carried with it the strength of ages, who wielded an army not of crude cybernetic hybrids, but of giants bred from the very essence of mankind. A flicker of unease, barely a spark, ignited within him. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of his own mortality, buried somewhere beneath layers of flesh and steel. He dismissed the feeling with a snarl, turning to the cloaked figure waiting at his side. "Send a message," he rasped, his voice grinding like metal on stone. "Tell this Emperor that if he crosses my borders, he'll find only death waiting for him." The cloaked figure nodded, bowing low before retreating into the shadows. Dune watched him go, his mind already moving to thoughts of war. He would prepare his weapons, awaken the gene beasts, ready the Scion Weavers. If this so-called Emperor sought to claim Terra, he would find his ambitions broken on the shores of Dune's empire. Far to the west, beneath a banner of pure gold, the Emperor of Mankind was already preparing his response. Word of Narthan Dune's defiance reached the Emperor within days. His court, an assembly of proto-warriors, scholars, and strategists, watched silently as he read the message, his expression unreadable, like stone carved in the shape of a man. Around him, banners bearing the twin-headed eagle of Unification fluttered in the dry, polluted wind. The Emperor's forces were camped at the edge of what had once been the Himalayan mountains, the heart of his growing empire, and from this bastion he gazed east, toward the distant lands of the Pan-Pacific Empire. Beside him stood one of his most trusted lieutenants, a thunder warrior named Thane of the Dusk Cohort. Thane was a towering figure, even by the standards of the Emperor's augmented warriors. His bronze armor bore scars from countless battles, and his face, partially hidden behind a thick visor, was hardened into a mask of grim determination. Like all Thunder Warriors, he was a creature who had once been a mortal man, an adult volunteer loyal to the Emperor's cause, who had chosen to undergo horrific alterations through alchemical augmentation, somatic gene sculpting, and muscle grafting to become something far beyond human. Their strength was legendary, their ferocity unmatched, though they paid a steep price. Short lives, prone to metabolic collapse and mental instability as their bodies struggled to contain the potent transformations inflicted upon them. They were more savage, more resilient, and more brutally effective than any warrior Terra had ever known. Thane watched his lord in silence, waiting. He had seen the Emperor in battle, watched him wade through tides of screaming soldiers and armored vehicles as if they were nothing more than playthings. Yet in moments like these, moments of stillness before the storm, he was reminded of the depth of his master's intellect, of the mind that crafted strategies as intricate as any machine, as unyielding as Terra itself. After a moment, the Emperor looked up, his eyes meeting Thane's through the slits of his golden helm. His voice was calm, but every word carried an almost tangible weight, as if each syllable was etched in iron. Dune believes himself invincible, the Emperor said, his voice resonant, layered with a force that was neither human nor entirely comprehensible. He clings to his ancient technologies, his mutations, his gene beasts, but he is no different from the others. He will fall. Thane nodded, understanding his master's intent. He had seen this process before, the methodical unification of Terra's warring states. The Emperor's campaign had swept across continents, toppling the tyrants and warlords who had preyed upon humanity for generations. Each one had thought themselves unique, unstoppable. Each one had been wrong. "Shall we deploy the full strength of the Dusk cohort?" Thane asked, his tone respectful, almost reverent. The Emperor paused, considering. "No, the Pan-Pacific Empire is strong, but they are twisted by their own arrogance and dependence on corrupted technologies. We will show them that the strength of mankind lies not in crude enhancements, but in purpose, in unity." He gestured to the vast army gathered in the valley below. Legions of soldiers clad in rudimentary but effective armor waited under the sun, their discipline unmatched among the fractured peoples of Terra. Among them strode the Thunder Warriors, larger and more terrifying than any mortal man. They were brutal, unstable, and fiercely loyal, more instruments of destruction than men. "We march at dawn," the Emperor said finally, his gaze fixed on the eastern horizon. "Let Narthan Dune see what true strength is. We will not stop until his lands are free of his corruption. His empire will fall, and his memory will be nothing but ash in the wind." Thane saluted, a fist to his chest in a gesture that was part devotion, part acknowledgement. He knew that, for all their strength, he and his brothers were flawed creations, tempestuous, short-lived, and prone to madness. But they would do their duty, as they had done since the beginning, for they believed in the Emperor's vision, a unified Terra, free from the horrors of the Techno-Barbarians. As Thane descended from the Emperor's side, he joined the ranks of his brothers in the Dusk cohort. They moved in near-perfect unison like a well-oiled machine, preparing for the battle to come. Each of them remembered a time before their transformation, a time when they had been mere men. Now they were monsters in human form, the product of the Emperor's ruthless ambition. And though they had served in dozens of campaigns, each warlord they faced was a new challenge, a new test of their loyalty and strength. This time, however, there was a sense of anticipation humming through their ranks. Narthan Dune was no mere warlord. He was a figure whose empire had thrived through centuries of strife. The stories of his gene-forged monstrosities, his armored legions, his dark sorceries had spread like wildfire. For once, even the hardened Thunder Warriors felt a glimmer of unease, mixed with their eagerness to bring ruin to yet another pretender. The Emperor stood alone, his gaze still fixed on the distant east. In his mind, he saw the future, a unified Terra, free from the chaos of the Techno-Barbarians, united under a single banner. The Pan-Pacific Empire was one of the last great obstacles to his vision, and he would see it shattered. He closed his eyes, just for a moment, as if savoring the calm before the storm. In the morning light, they would march. The dawn broke over the eastern horizon, casting a sickly glow through the dense smog that choked the skies above the Pan-Pacific Empire. As the Emperor's forces advanced, the land seemed to resist them, a twisted wasteland that bore scars of centuries of industrial ravaging and toxic warfare. Once fertile plains were now barren and ash-strewn. Rivers ran black with the refuse of endless factories. This was Narthan Dune's legacy, a land shaped in his image, cruel and corrupted. At the head of the vanguard marched Thane and the Dusk cohort, a wave of bronze and iron that rolled across the dead earth. The Thunder Warriors moved with brutal efficiency, their enhanced senses sweeping the ruined landscape for any sign of enemy forces. Behind them came the mortal soldiers, disciplined and steadfast, their faces hard set with grim resolve. The Emperor had promised them a new world, free from the terror of tyrants like Dune. For that vision, they would follow him to the ends of Terra. The Emperor himself walked among his soldiers, a golden figure whose very presence seemed to part the polluted air around him. To those near him, his aura was a tangible thing, a quiet but overwhelming force that bolstered their courage and steeled their minds. In his hand, he carried a gleaming sword, its blade forged in ancient fires and inscribed with symbols that few dared to look upon. He was no ordinary warlord. Even in his silence, he was something more, an embodiment of purpose, a force of nature incarnate. The first signs of resistance came as they neared a twisted, rusting sprawl of factories on the horizon. Shapes appeared in the haze, moving with an unnatural, jerking gait. As they drew closer, Thane saw what awaited them. Cybernetic monstrosities, half man, half machine, assembled from flesh and metal in grotesque combinations. Some had arms replaced with weaponized limbs. Others bore metallic exoskeletons grafted directly into their bones. Their eyes glowed with a cold, mechanical light, and their movements were driven by the faint whirring and clicking of failing servos. These were Dune's steel wraiths, the terror of his empire. Bred from the gene stock of his enslaved populace and augmented beyond recognition, they were programmed to feel neither fear nor pain, their minds conditioned for nothing but violence. They stood in ranks, weapons bristling, awaiting the command to attack. Thane snarled under his breath, his grip tightening on his own blade. He had faced Dune's forces before in smaller skirmishes, but never in such numbers. This was a new scale of warfare, a testament to the depths of Dune's cruelty and his willingness to sacrifice any shred of humanity to maintain his power. With a single motion, the Emperor raised his sword and the signal was given. At the Emperor's signal, the Dusk cohort surged forward like a wave of bronze and steel. Thane led the charge, his blade raised high as he crossed the scorched earth toward the ranks of Dune's steel wraiths. The Thunder Warriors let out fierce battle cries, their voices ringing across the broken landscape, raw and powerful, a testament to the indomitable force driving them. The steel wraiths moved with mechanical precision, lifting their weapons in eerie unison. The air filled with the hum of energy discharges and the crack of heavy projectiles, and beams of bright light sliced through the dawn. Mortal soldiers fell in the opening barrage, their ranks disrupted by the blasts and impacts, while others pressed onward, undeterred. Yet the Thunder Warriors pushed forward, resilient beyond ordinary human limits. Thane himself took a glancing shot to the shoulder, his armor singed and hot against his skin, but he pressed on, charging forward with grim determination. His blade swung down through the first steel wraith he encountered, slicing through its mechanical body with brutal efficiency. Sparks flew as it fell, but Thane had already moved on, his eyes set on the next enemy. Behind him, the Emperor's soldiers rallied, finding courage in the unstoppable advance of the Thunder Warriors. Mortal men might have felt terror facing such mechanized foes, but the Emperor's presence filled them with a strength beyond fear. Together, they moved forward, their weapons flashing in steady unison, step by step pushing back against Dune's twisted creations. In the thick of the fray, Thane felt a deep thrill rising within him, a focus that overpowered pain or exhaustion. The steel wraiths were formidable, yet they lacked the raw, unyielding will of the Thunder Warriors, who fought with the intensity of men who understood their purpose and accepted its cost. Amid the battle, the Emperor himself moved with deadly grace, his golden armor cutting a radiant path through the smoky haze. His sword swept through one enemy after another, precise and unrelenting. Wherever he fought, his soldiers found renewed courage, as if his presence alone steadied their hearts and minds in the chaos. Gradually, the steel wraiths began to falter, their lines disrupted under the relentless advance of the Emperor's forces. As the Emperor's forces pressed deeper into the Pan-Pacific Empire's territory, the resistance only grew fiercer. Dune's legions seemed endless, each wave of enemies equipped with crude yet lethal weapons and reinforced by monstrous hybrid warriors. Gene-forged abominations, hulking creatures that combined human DNA with the traits of beasts, emerged from hidden bunkers and fortified positions, their bodies swollen with muscle and twisted beyond recognition. They charged into the fray with animalistic fury, roaring as they threw themselves at the Emperor's soldiers. The Thunder Warriors met them head-on. Thane's sword clashed against the claws and hardened skin of these unnatural creatures, his every strike a testament to his raw, engineered power. He fought without hesitation, driving his blade into one beast's chest, feeling the shock as it buckled under his strength. Around him, his brothers of the Dusk cohort fought with the same brutal efficiency, each Thunder Warrior carving a path through the genetic horrors that Dune had unleashed upon them. Behind the Thunder Warriors, the mortal soldiers fought as best they could, supporting their advance with disciplined volleys of fire. For every hybrid that fell to a Thunder Warrior's blade, another was brought down by the precision of lasgun fire or the explosive crack of a grenade. They fought as a single force with unity and purpose, the values that the Emperor had instilled in them since the beginning of his campaign. Through the din of battle, Thane caught glimpses of the Emperor, a beacon of golden light amidst the dark chaos. The Emperor fought like no other, moving with a fluidity and purpose that seemed almost unreal. His sword cut through gene beasts and steel wraiths alike, his expression calm, his movements as measured as a master craftsman at work. Every strike he made seemed to carry a weight beyond the physical, as if his very presence asserted his claim on these lands. But Dune's forces showed no sign of yielding. For every wave of soldiers and hybrids the Emperor's army defeated, another line of defenders seemed to emerge from the smoke, fortified in makeshift bunkers and armed with primitive artillery. The Emperor's forces were pushing forward, but the ground they claimed came at a cost. As the battle raged on, Thane could feel the strain settling into his body, the edges of fatigue creeping into his muscles. The Thunder Warriors were not built for endurance. Their power came with the cost of a short lifespan, and in prolonged battles like this, every strike drained them further. Yet Thane fought on, driving himself forward by sheer will. He knew that this was the mission he had committed his life to, the Emperor's unification of Terra. The battlefield was a scene of devastation, littered with the remains of fallen warriors and the wreckage of Dune's unnatural creations. Smoke hung thick in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of spent ammunition and scorched earth. The Emperor's forces pressed forward step by step, unyielding despite the fierce resistance. Thane's body was battered, his armor scorched and dented, but his resolve remained unbroken. He fought with the grim knowledge that every strike, every advance was a step closer to the Emperor's vision, a Terra unified, cleansed of the techno-barbaric rulers who had fractured it for so long. As he cut down another steel wraith, its mechanical frame sparking and collapsing under his blow, he found himself scanning the battlefield, searching for signs of a break in the enemy's lines. But the Pan-Pacific Empire was a realm shaped by fear and forged through cruelty, and its defenders seemed almost as relentless as the Emperor's own. Many of them were more machine than human, grafted into their armored suits, or augmented with crude cybernetic limbs that whirred and clanked with every movement. It was clear that Dune had forced his people into this service, altering them beyond recognition to create an army that would never retreat. Amidst the chaos, a new sound rose above the clash of battle, a deep, resonant horn echoing from the east. Thane turned, narrowing his eyes against the smoke to see a massive formation advancing from the edge of the battlefield. These soldiers wore heavier armor than the others, each one adorned with the insignia of Dune's elite guard. At the forefront marched a towering figure, wrapped in dark armor marked with symbols of Dune's twisted empire. This was no ordinary commander. It was one of Dune's gene-forged champions, a warrior who had been molded through forbidden science to rival the Thunder Warriors in strength and resilience. Thane felt a surge of anticipation, the weariness in his limbs momentarily forgotten. He signaled to his brothers, and together the Dusk cohort adjusted their formation, bracing for this new threat. The Emperor's army would not falter, but the arrival of Dune's champion promised a fierce confrontation. The Emperor himself noticed the arrival of the elite guard. Without hesitation, he moved toward the new threat, his golden armor shining like a beacon through the haze. Thane knew that this was no ordinary foe. The gene-forged champion was likely crafted specifically to confront the Emperor's warriors, designed with strength to match their own. The two forces closed the distance, and with a single motion from the Emperor, the battle began anew. Thane led the charge alongside his brothers in the Dusk cohort, their bronze armor gleaming dully beneath the polluted sky as they surged toward Dune's elite guard. These new foes moved with a disciplined precision, their heavy armor and cybernetic enhancements making them formidable opponents even for Thunder Warriors. The clang of metal on metal and the hiss of energy weapons filled the air as the two forces clashed. The gene-forged champion at the head of Dune's forces was a monstrous figure, towering over even the Thunder Warriors. Muscles bulged beneath layers of reinforced plating, and its eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, as though it saw the world through some twisted mixture of organic and mechanical vision. The champion wielded a massive, serrated blade, each swing powerful enough to cleave through armor and bone alike. Thane met the champion's gaze and pushed forward, his own weapon held ready. With a roar, he swung his sword in a downward arc, aiming to bring down this living symbol of Dune's defiance. The champion parried with surprising speed, their weapons clashing in a shower of sparks. The impact sent a jolt through Thane's arms, but he held firm, gritting his teeth and pushing back against the champion's strength. Around them, the battle intensified. Thunder Warriors and mortal soldiers fought side by side, their combined efforts slowly wearing down the ranks of Dune's elite guard. Las guns flashed, grenades exploded, and the cries of combatants filled the air. Despite the strength and tenacity of Dune's forces, the Emperor's army advanced, step by relentless step, driving the enemy back. Thane circled his opponent, seeking an opening. The champion swung its blade again, a wide, brutal arc aimed at Thane's torso. Thane sidestepped, narrowly avoiding the strike, and countered with a swift thrust aimed at the gaps in the champion's armor. His blade found its mark, sinking deep, but the champion only snarled and struck back with renewed fury. It was clear that this creation of Dune's was engineered to withstand punishment and keep fighting, no matter the cost. In the midst of this struggle, Thane caught a glimpse of the Emperor himself, advancing steadily toward the heart of Dune's forces. His movements were fluid and controlled, each strike precise, each step carrying him forward with an unbreakable determination. The Emperor's very presence seemed to disrupt Dune's forces, as if they could feel the inevitability of his will pressing down upon them. The champion staggered, weakened by Thane's relentless assault. With a final, forceful blow, Thane drove his sword through its armor, ending the battle between them. With the champion of Dune's forces fallen, a ripple of unease spread through the ranks of the Pan-Pacific elite guard. They had been designed and conditioned to obey without fear, but the sight of their leader struck down by the Emperor's Thunder Warriors was enough to shake even these hardened soldiers. Some began to waver, their movements losing the clockwork precision they had displayed before. Sensing the shift, Thane rallied the Dusk cohort, lifting his sword high to signal the final push. "For Terra and the Emperor!" he shouted, his voice ringing out across the battlefield. His brothers took up the cry, and together they advanced with renewed vigor, driving a wedge through the enemy's lines. The mortal soldiers of the Emperor's army followed, pressing forward in disciplined ranks behind the Thunder Warriors. Every step brought them closer to the heart of Dune's empire, to the very gates of his fortress. For many of these men, the sight of the Thunder Warriors cutting through the enemy filled them with a courage they had never known. They were fighting not just for survival, but for a new future, one that the Emperor had promised them, a unified Terra free from the chains of barbarism and oppression. But Dune's forces were not finished yet. From the fortress on the horizon, massive artillery emplacements began to open fire, sending shells arcing across the battlefield. Explosions erupted around the Emperor's troops, showering the ground with dirt and debris. Men were thrown back by the blasts, and the advance momentarily slowed as the Emperor's forces adjusted their formation, shielding themselves from the worst of the bombardment. Thane shielded his eyes from the dust and debris, glancing toward the Emperor, who stood at the forefront, unyielding amid the chaos. Even as shells exploded around him, the Emperor's calm was unshaken. He lifted his hand, and with a single gesture, he signaled for the heavy weaponry of his own forces to respond. From the rear of the Emperor's lines, the roar of artillery returned fire. Shells streaked across the battlefield, meeting the fortress's guns in a deadly exchange. The ground trembled with each impact, and thick plumes of smoke began to rise, obscuring the horizon. Thane pressed forward, his every step a battle against the concussive force of the blasts around him. His heart pounded as he realized how close they were to Dune's stronghold. The fortress loomed, its dark walls and jagged towers silhouetted against the smoke-filled sky, an ancient monument to the power and cruelty of its master. Through the thunder of artillery, Thane felt the resolve of the Emperor's forces harden. They had fought too far and sacrificed too much to turn back now. The heart of Dune's empire lay within reach, and with it, the promise of Terra's unification. The advance continued step by step as the Emperor's forces pushed through the smoke and fire toward the fortress gates. The closer they came, the more resistance they faced. Dune's defenders fought desperately, emerging from concealed bunkers and firing from fortified positions. For them, this was a last stand, the final barrier between the Emperor's unstoppable army and their tyrant's seat of power. Thane moved with purpose, his body aching from the long battle, but his mind focused on the task ahead. He and his brothers in the Dusk cohort cut through enemy lines with practiced precision, each strike from their weapons clearing a path forward. Beside them, the mortal soldiers fought valiantly, inspired by the Thunder Warrior's example and by the presence of the Emperor himself, who advanced at their head, a golden figure amidst the darkness and smoke. As they neared the fortress gates, the defenses grew even thicker. Automated turrets mounted on the walls opened fire, filling the air with hails of bullets and beams of searing energy. The Emperor's soldiers took cover where they could, moving forward in tight formations to minimize their exposure. The Thunder Warriors, however, charged head-on, their augmented bodies allowing them to withstand the punishment longer than ordinary men. Thane led the way, narrowly dodging a blast from one of the turrets before leaping onto a fortified barricade. With a swift slash, he dispatched a defender, his blades slicing through armor with ease. Around him, his brothers fought with the same unyielding resolve, each of them embodying the Emperor's relentless vision. In the midst of the fray, the Emperor raised his sword, and a surge of energy seemed to flow through his forces. The mortal soldiers, emboldened by his presence, pressed forward with renewed courage. They moved in coordinated waves, covering each other as they advanced under the cover of the Thunder Warriors. Finally, the massive gates of the fortress loomed before them, sealed shut and reinforced with layers of thick metal. For a moment, the army hesitated, unsure how they would breach such an impenetrable barrier. But the Emperor stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the gate, and raised his hand. With a single powerful gesture, he commanded the gates to open. His will seemed to ripple through the air, a force that resonated in the hearts of his soldiers and struck fear into the minds of his enemies. The gates trembled, groaned, and then slowly began to part. The Emperor's forces pressed forward, meeting Dune's elite guard in the shadowed halls of the fortress. Thane moved alongside his brothers, each step measured, each swing of his weapon controlled. Ahead of him stood one of Dune's armored champions, a figure built for battle and enhanced beyond recognition. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were Dune's finest, trained and equipped with advanced technology to resist any invasion. Thane aimed a precise strike at his opponent's shoulder, but his weapon glanced off the heavy plating. The guard responded swiftly, raising an armored arm toward Thane in a defensive motion. Thane shifted his stance, stepping back to reassess, and then angled his weapon to strike at the vulnerable joints in the guard's armor. The Thunder Warriors moved with purpose, each of them working in concert to overcome the formidable defenses of Dune's guard. Around them, the hall was filled with the sounds of the advancing forces, the disciplined movements of the Emperor's soldiers, the hum of energy fields, and the steady, controlled pace of the Emperor himself as he moved through the ranks. The Emperor's presence had a powerful effect on his warriors. Even in the dim light of the fortress, his golden armor was a steady beacon, his steps filled with quiet confidence. Each motion of his sword was exact, each step taken with calm resolve. His presence seemed to strengthen the spirits of those around him, giving them a focus and courage that pushed them forward. Thane, feeling the influence of the Emperor's example, concentrated on his own opponent. Finally, after a series of careful maneuvers, he managed to bypass the guard's defenses, bringing the encounter to an end. Looking around, he saw that the momentum had shifted. Dune's defenders, though resilient, were beginning to yield under the Emperor's steady advance. One by one, the elite guard were withdrawing, unable to hold back the Emperor's forces in the face of such resolve. With Dune's elite guard pushed back, the Emperor's forces advanced deeper into the fortress, navigating dimly lit corridors and chambers carved from black metal. Strange, flickering lights illuminated the walls, casting distorted shadows that danced as the soldiers moved forward. Thane and his brothers remained at the front, their senses heightened, ready for whatever lay ahead. The fortress itself felt almost alive, as if it resisted their presence. The air was thick, and an oppressive silence hung over the halls, broken only by the measured steps of the Emperor's army. Thane could sense a strange tension in the space, an unnatural feeling that made the hairs on the back of his neck prickle. This was the heart of Narthan Dune's empire, and it felt tainted, as if warped by the forbidden technologies he had embraced. Finally, they reached a vast chamber at the center of the fortress. Towering pillars of dark steel rose toward the ceiling, and rows of ancient, intricate machinery lined the walls, humming with hidden energy. At the far end of the room, upon a raised platform, stood Narthan Dune himself. Clad in armor that seemed woven from shadows and reinforced with intricate mechanical devices, he looked down at the advancing soldiers with a gaze that was both calm and cold. Dune was an imposing figure, his presence commanding even in the face of the Emperor's army. His body was heavily augmented, and strange, pulsing lines of energy ran through his armor. His face, partially obscured by a dark helm, bore an expression of steely confidence, a warlord who had ruled his domain for centuries, now facing what might be his final challenge. The Emperor stepped forward, his gaze locked on Dune. An intense silence filled the chamber, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Thane felt the weight of the moment, the sense that they were witnessing a confrontation that would shape the future of Terra. Dune raised a hand, and the hidden machinery around him hummed to life. Energy pulsed through the chamber, and from behind him, a contingent of his personal guard appeared, stepping forward to stand between Dune and the Emperor's forces. Each guard bore the same dark armor, their loyalty clear in the way they took up defensive positions without hesitation. The Emperor lifted his sword, and with a single motion, he signaled for his forces to advance once more. Thane and the Dusk cohort moved forward, their focus sharpened, prepared to face whatever challenges awaited them in the heart of Dune's stronghold. The final battle for the Pan-Pacific Empire had truly begun. As the Emperor's forces advanced toward Dune's throne, the air in the chamber grew charged, filled with the low hum of ancient machinery and the faint, rhythmic pulse of energy. Thane led the Dusk cohort with steady purpose, his gaze fixed on Dune's personal guard standing ready to intercept them. These were Dune's last and most loyal defenders, armored in shadow black plating and equipped with weapons designed to match the might of the Emperor's elite. The Thunder Warriors moved in disciplined formations, each warrior synchronized with the others, their steps echoing across the vast, dimly lit hall. The mortal soldiers followed closely behind, forming a line of steadfast support. For all of them, this was the final push, the culmination of their campaign against one of Terra's most powerful warlords. Narthan Dune watched from his raised platform, silent and unmoving. His face, half concealed by his dark helm, revealed no emotion, yet his stance radiated defiance. This was his empire, built through will and ruthlessness, a monument to his belief that Terra could be shaped by those with the strength to seize it. Around him, darkened machines pulsed and hummed, filling the chamber with an aura of strange energy. Every element of this fortress reflected Dune's ambition, his unyielding grip over the lands he controlled. The Emperor stepped forward, his golden armor gleaming in the shifting, dim light. His presence filled the hall, steady and calm amid the looming shadows. Without a word, he let his gaze settle on Dune, his intent clear and unshakable. This was the final confrontation, a challenge against everything Dune had built, an end to the rule of fear that had dominated the Pan-Pacific Empire for so long. Dune's guards raised their weapons, forming a defensive wall between their master and the advancing forces. Thane and the Thunder Warriors responded, bracing themselves as they prepared to meet this last line of resistance. They knew this was more than a battle. It was a clash of ideals, the decisive struggle that would determine the future of this land. The Emperor raised his sword, signaling the charge. With a unified cry, the Thunder Warriors surged forward, their movements powerful and coordinated. Thane felt the weight of his mission pressing upon him, pushing him to fight with all the strength and skill he had. The Dust Cohort met the first line of Dune's guard, their weapons moving in precise, controlled strikes, every motion honed by a lifetime of training and dedication. In the heart of his fortress, surrounded by the power he had wielded for centuries, Narthan Dune stood ready to face the Emperor of mankind. The clash of forces in the Great Hall was swift and intense. Thane and the Thunder Warriors struck with precision, moving as one, their synchronized movements honed through countless battles. Dune's elite guard met them head-on, their black armor gleaming, every strike carefully calculated. These were warriors who had been trained to defend their master without question, and they fought with a determination that mirrored the Emperor's own soldiers. Thane felt the impact of each exchange reverberate through his body, but his focus remained sharp. His strikes were measured, aiming for the weak points in the guard's armor, each swing backed by the relentless strength of his enhanced form. He knew his own limits well. The Thunder Warriors were powerful, yet they were not built to last forever. Every strike was executed with purpose, each movement conserving energy as he and his brothers pushed forward. Suddenly, a shout from nearby cut through the din of battle. Thane glanced over to see one of his brothers falter, his stance slipping into something wild, uncontrolled. The Thunder Warrior's eyes had taken on a frenzied look, his face twisting in a mix of rage and confusion as he lashed out without aim, his movements erratic. This was a danger they all knew well. The strain of their enhancements could sometimes overtake them, pushing them into a state of uncontrollable aggression. Without hesitation, two Thunder Warriors near him broke formation and moved in swiftly, their actions smooth and coordinated, as if practiced countless times. They grabbed their comrade's arms, forcing him down, their own movements calm and steady, well versed in handling this dark side of their kind. Within moments, they had subdued him, holding him in place until the madness faded from his eyes. Then, just as quickly, they returned to the battle, their expressions unchanged, the interruption handled like a known hazard. The Emperor moved through the fray with an almost ethereal calm, his golden armor reflecting the sparse light that filtered through the chamber. His presence seemed to create a path through the chaos, and wherever he stepped, his soldiers rallied, their morale bolstered by his steady advance. He moved toward Dune's throne, cutting through the defenses with quiet efficiency, as if each motion were part of a carefully planned sequence. Dune, standing on his elevated platform, watched the Emperor's approach with a look that was hard to read, a mixture of defiance and something more reserved, almost analytical. He had prepared for this moment, filling his fortress with defenses and surrounding himself with his most loyal warriors. But the Emperor's forces were unlike any enemy he had faced. Their discipline, their unity, and the presence of the Emperor himself cut through his defenses with relentless momentum. As the elite guard began to thin, Dune's expression shifted. He took a step back, his gaze lingering on the Emperor. In that brief moment, Thane thought he saw a flicker of something, perhaps recognition of the strength opposing him, or a realization that his reign was finally coming to its end. The Emperor paused, his gaze locked on Dune. An intense silence fell over the chamber as the remaining defenders parted, leaving only the Emperor and the warlord of the Pan-Pacific Empire facing each other. The silence between the Emperor and Narthan Dune stretched, heavy and charged. The chamber felt almost still, as if even the shadows were holding their breath. The remaining soldiers and Thunder Warriors paused, standing back and watching, aware that this moment would decide the fate of the Pan-Pacific Empire. Dune regarded the Emperor with a mixture of caution and fierce pride. He had ruled these lands for centuries, shaping them through his own vision, bending technology and human will to create his empire. Now, here was a figure who threatened to erase all he had built, to bring an end to the legacy he had crafted with iron and blood. With a calm that seemed at odds with the tension in the air, the Emperor stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. His sword hung at his side, but he did not raise it. Instead, he studied Dune, his expression thoughtful, as if weighing the man before him, considering the journey that had brought them to this moment. Dune spoke, his voice low and resonant, carrying through the vast chamber. "You think yourself a god, don't you?" His tone held a note of disdain, but there was something else in it too, a hint of something almost like respect. "You come here, expecting me to kneel, to surrender everything I have created." The Emperor's expression remained steady, his silence more powerful than any retort. It was a silence filled with purpose, as though he saw beyond Dune's words, beyond the walls of this fortress, to a future only he could envision. Seeing no response, Dune continued, his voice rising. "I built this empire from nothing. I took broken men, scarred lands, and forged them into something strong. You cannot take that from me." The Emperor took one more step forward, his presence alone seeming to fill the space between them. He met Dune's gaze without a word, letting the silence stretch, a wordless declaration that needed no embellishment. Dune's eyes narrowed, his hand twitching toward his own weapon. The tension in the room thickened as both leaders, embodiments of opposing ideals, stood locked in silent confrontation. Around them, the warriors on both sides braced themselves, prepared for the final clash. And then, with a sudden, fluid motion, Dune raised his weapon, and the Emperor met him, their blades crossing in a flash of light. The clash between the Emperor and Narthan Dune sent a shockwave through the chamber, the force of their meeting reverberating across the dark hall. Sparks flew as their blades connected, filling the air with harsh light that illuminated the faces of soldiers on both sides, frozen in anticipation. For all the battles the Emperor's forces had fought to reach this moment, this single confrontation carried the weight of every victory, every loss, and every sacrifice. Dune fought with surprising speed, each strike calculated and bolstered by the strength of his augmented form. His armor was reinforced with ancient technologies, amplifying his movements, while arcane symbols etched into its surface pulsed with an eerie glow. He wielded his weapon with the practiced skill of someone who had ruled through force for centuries, his every movement precise and controlled. But the Emperor was something beyond mortal limits. His movements were calm, almost effortless, each motion imbued with an authority that went far deeper than strength alone. He was a master of both the physical and the unseen. In him existed a connection to forces that few could comprehend, what the ancients might have called the warp, though its depths were twisted and dangerous for most who dared touch it. Yet for the Emperor, it was an unfettered source of energy, a power he commanded with complete mastery. His very being was uncorruptible down to the core of his cells. Where others might risk madness or corruption in trying to access such power, the Emperor held it with ease, a steady flame that burned brighter and purer than anything touched by shadow. As he met Dune's strikes, it was clear that this strength wasn't merely physical. His presence filled the chamber, as if he carried a part of that infinite realm within him, controlled and contained, an overwhelming force bound to his will. Thane watched, feeling a sense of awe as the two leaders engaged. For a moment, he saw Dune's face contort, a flash of frustration breaking through his calm demeanor as the Emperor met each of his strikes without yielding an inch. The confidence Dune had worn so boldly when he addressed his soldiers seemed to waver, his expression shifting to one of grim determination as he realized the depth of the challenge before him. Around them, the soldiers of both sides remained rooted in place, unwilling to disrupt this final duel. The Thunder Warriors and mortal soldiers watched with a kind of reverence, sensing they were witnessing a moment that would echo through history. Dune, refusing to falter, unleashed a series of swift, powerful strikes, his weapon arcing toward the Emperor in a blur. But the Emperor met him each time, his movements unhurried, his focus unbroken. It was as if he were not merely fighting Dune, but outlasting him, wearing down his resolve as much as his strength. And then, with a sudden, fluid motion, the Emperor found an opening. His blade moved with surgical precision, slipping past Dune's defenses with ease. Before Dune could react, the Emperor's strike had found its mark, ending the battle in a single, decisive blow. Dune froze, his breath catching as he stared down at the Emperor's weapon, his expression shifting from defiance to a quiet acceptance, as if he had understood in that final moment the power he had faced. As Dune's gaze fell, the vast chamber seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had gripped everyone within. The sound of the Emperor's blade withdrawing echoed through the hall, a final note that signaled the end of Dune's rule. For a moment, there was only silence, a heavy, profound silence, as the soldiers of both sides took in what had just happened. Narthan Dune, the feared tyrant of the Pan-Pacific Empire, stood defeated. His armor, once a symbol of his power, now seemed to sag, its intricate circuits flickering erratically. His eyes, once filled with fierce pride, softened as he looked at the Emperor, as if in his final moments he understood the inevitability of his fall. His empire, built through iron will and brutal strength, was at an end. The Emperor looked down at Dune's fallen form, his expression unreadable. He stepped back, turning to the gathered soldiers of the Pan-Pacific Empire, his voice calm and commanding. "Warriors of the Pan-Pacific," he said, his words cutting through the silence, "lay down your weapons or join your master." For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, Dune's soldiers began to lower their weapons, casting their eyes to the ground. The fortress, once an impenetrable bastion of their leader's ambition, now felt hollow, its spirit shattered. Without another word, the Emperor turned and strode away, his forces parting to let him pass. His golden armor caught the dim light as he walked through the ranks, a quiet presence that held the weight of absolute authority. As he passed Thane, he gave a single measured instruction. "Search the city," he said, his tone as calm as ever. "Take any relics you find to Malcador." Thane nodded, a fierce sense of purpose surging through him at the command. The Emperor continued on without a backward glance, his stride unbroken as he left the hall. Behind him, his soldiers moved to carry out his orders, securing the fortress and beginning the process of organizing Dune's former followers into a controlled surrender. Thane watched as the Emperor's figure faded down the corridor, his silent authority lingering even in his absence. Around him, the Emperor's soldiers moved with purpose, securing the fortress that had once been the heart of Narthan Dune's empire. The Pan-Pacific Empire had fallen, but the task was far from over. Thane turned to his brothers in the Dusk cohort and gestured for them to begin their search. Their orders were clear: locate and retrieve any relics, technologies, or forbidden artifacts that might serve the Emperor's purpose, or pose a threat if left unchecked. These would be delivered to Malcador, the Emperor's trusted advisor and custodian of such mysteries. The Thunder Warriors moved efficiently through the shadowed corridors and cavernous rooms, fanning out in teams. The fortress, though stripped of its leader, still held a strange, unsettling energy. It was a place molded by Dune's ambitions, filled with twisted machinery, strange devices, and weapons crafted to assert control over every corner of his realm. Thane knew they would return to this city soon enough. In places like this, the Emperor often commanded a second, more thorough purge, a sweep to rid the population of any lingering mutations or deviations Dune had fostered. Moving through the fortress, Thane and his team discovered a vast array of equipment, some familiar, some disturbingly alien. In one chamber, they found a towering, ornate machine, carved with strange symbols and faintly pulsing with residual energy. Its purpose was unclear, but its presence alone suggested it was something Dune had held in high regard. Thane marked it for collection, signaling his brothers to handle it with caution. In the Emperor's hands, perhaps such devices could be repurposed, stripped of their original intent, and made into tools for a unified Terra. The Thunder Warriors gathered relics and devices from across the fortress, handling each piece carefully. Every object they found was a relic of Dune's obsession, a reminder of the lengths he had gone to reshape humanity to fit his vision. For Thane, these artifacts were trophies of a conquered regimes, yet they also symbolized the work that lay ahead, the cleansing and rebuilding that would follow this victory. After hours of searching, Thane and his squad returned to the main hall, their arms laden with the relics and devices they had gathered. They were warriors, but they understood that their purpose went beyond battle. They were laying the groundwork for a new world, a Terra cleansed of the fractured empires and their twisted legacies. 1 week later, Malcador the Sigillite sat in a dimly lit chamber deep within the Himalaysian complex, surrounded by relics from the Pan-Pacific Empire. The room was vast and quiet, its stone walls lined with shelves and cabinets that would, in time, be filled with the artifacts and records of a united Terra. For now, it served as a temporary repository, a workspace for Malcador to examine the relics brought back from Dune's stronghold. With measured care, he lifted each object, cataloging and marking them according to their nature. Some pieces he noted as potentially useful, devices and data caches containing knowledge that might advance the Emperor's grand project. Others he deemed too dangerous or corrupting, setting them aside for long-term storage and isolation, where they would pose no threat to humanity. Malcador moved efficiently, his hands steady as he worked, yet his gaze was thoughtful, almost reverent. As the last living member of the ancient Sigillite order, he was bound by duty to preserve the technological legacy of mankind. The Sigillites had existed since the Dark Age of technology, a secretive sect tasked with collecting and safeguarding the most powerful and forbidden devices ever created. For centuries, Malcador had been custodian of these secrets, a lone figure in the shadows, preserving knowledge that most of humanity had forgotten, or, in some cases, feared. He paused over one artifact in particular, a small, intricately etched device that glowed faintly with residual energy. It appeared to be a data storage unit, though its design was unlike any he had seen before. A remnant from the Dark Age, no doubt, a time when humanity had reached the height of technological prowess, only to be brought low by its own creations. He weighed it in his hand, considering its possible uses, and decided to mark it as useful, though he noted that it required further study. This task was familiar to him, almost routine. Over the centuries, he had examined countless relics, some wondrous, others horrific. Each artifact represented a fragment of a bygone era, a glimpse into the heights humanity had once reached and the mistakes it had made along the way. Malcador had learned to treat these objects with caution. Even in the most benign-seeming relics, there could be dangers hidden within their circuitry, long-dormant protocols that could awaken under the wrong conditions. As he continued his work, he thought of the Emperor's vision. The unification of Terra was only the beginning, a foundation for something greater, something that would take humanity beyond the petty conflicts and isolation that had defined it for so long. The Emperor's forces would reclaim humanity's lost knowledge, piece by piece, yet it was Malcador's duty to ensure that only the safest, most useful fragments would be brought forward into this new age. With a sigh, he set aside the last of the relics, marking it for storage. There were some technologies that, even now, could not be trusted in the hands of men. Malcador carefully closed the last of his cataloged files, placing it into a small, secure data slate. The chamber was quiet, his work done, when a faint chime echoed from the doorway, signaling the arrival of his guest. He stood as the Emperor entered, his towering form seeming to fill the room with an aura of quiet authority. Malcador offered a respectful nod, gesturing for the Emperor to take a seat, though he knew his master seldom did. The Emperor remained standing, his gaze drifting to the artifacts spread across the table before him. "Your report, Malcador?" he asked, his tone even, though there was a subtle intensity beneath it. The Emperor's mind was always moving forward, his focus on the next stage of his grand plan. "These relics from the Pan-Pacific Empire," Malcador began, his voice soft but clear, "have been assessed and cataloged. A few may hold value for our purposes. The rest are marked for storage, as they carry remnants of Dune's corruption." He glanced at the Emperor, whose eyes remained fixed on the artifacts, his expression unreadable. "They will be secured where they cannot harm Terra's future." The Emperor nodded, acknowledging the report, though his attention seemed elsewhere, already fixed on what lay ahead. Malcador knew that his master's thoughts were rarely bound to the present. The conquest of the Pan-Pacific Empire was complete, yet the Emperor's mind had already shifted to the next obstacle, the next fragment of Terra to be brought into compliance. "It is time to turn our attention north," the Emperor said, his gaze distant, his voice carrying an unspoken weight. "The lands of Nordic are still under the rule of the priest-king of Malcador Sen. He holds sway over a confederation of techno-barbarian tribes, each steeped in genetic tampering and occult practices. He paused, his expression hardening slightly. These people believed themselves beyond reach, protected by their isolation, their frost-covered lands. Malcador nodded, understanding the implications. Nordic was a fortress of defiance, a land where warriors bore the marks of crude genetic manipulation, where witch-marked zealots served the priest-king with fanatical loyalty. They had resisted outsiders for centuries, entrenched in a culture of brutal honor and ancient ritual. But the Emperor would tolerate no such enclaves of defiance on Terra. There are records from the Trans-Nordic Akashic archives, Malcador said, his tone thoughtful as he drew on the deep well of knowledge he had accumulated over centuries. They speak of the Malin Sen Confederacy, a powerful alliance of clans under the priest-king's rule. His warriors are genetically altered, his followers bound by oaths and ancient rituals. He paused. It will be a difficult campaign, my lord. The Emperor's gaze was steady, his response unwavering. I will lead the assault, he said. We will bring the Thunder Legion and 30 of my custodians. Nordic will submit. Malcador inclined his head, acknowledging the Emperor's determination. It was a rare thing, the Emperor leading an assault personally. His presence was reserved for the strongest strongholds, that the most defiant of rulers. The priest-king of Malin Sen was clearly one such adversary. Though his forces might outnumber the Emperor's 7-1, Malcador knew that opposition only strengthened the Emperor's resolve. As you wish, my lord, Malcador replied, already considering the necessary preparations. The Emperor's gaze drifted to the artifacts on the table. Ensure all is ready, he said, his voice calm. Once Nordic is brought into compliance, I will need these relics cataloged and prepared for study. With that, he turned and strode from the chamber, his presence leaving the room as quickly as it had filled it. Malcador watched him go, feeling the weight of history pressing upon him. Soon, the lands of Nordic would know the Emperor's might, and a new chapter in Terra's unification would be written. If you enjoyed this story and would like to see more, please consider subscribing for future chapters in Terra's unification saga. Together, we'll continue exploring the Emperor's relentless vision for humanity's future.